Welcome to another TerranScapes video. As you may have seen in some previous videos, I've been doing a series of reviews on the foam coat product from the Hotwire Foam Factory. And as a continuation of that, I decided for this video to take a look at two aspects of it. One is whether when you use the foam coat, which is, if you're new to the products, quick review, it's powdered gypsum cement that you mix with water to apply to your foam to give it a durable protection. And then you can mix it with Boost. And Boost is it's an adjunct to the foam coat, which improves both its stickiness to materials, which I'll discuss further in a second, as well as improves its overall durability and hardness. When I was looking at some of the other Hotwire Foam Factory products, comparing them to glue, I was showing you that it causes some warpage that's common amongst a lot of adhesives, and then somebody who had watched the video asked me about whether these products cause any warping, which was an important one for me, as I've been noticing something in my boards when I've been using it, and I wasn't sure if it was a trick of the eye or poor planning on my part, or whether it was a product effect, actually. So I'm going to take a look at those two things. And then the other thing that I wanted to take a look at was the drying times of the products. And I'll give you a close-up of this in a second, but one of the recommendations from the foam coat product, from the Hotwire Foam Factory I should say, is that if you mix in paint, latex paint, into the foam coat, it will retard its dry time and give you more working time. So I took a look at that, and I did one with some paint added and one without. And lastly, I wanted to give an update on the Bounce product with regards to its protection ability after you apply it to foam when you're going to be spraying something onto the foam that's corrosive to it, like aerosol paint. Usually you can't use spray cans because, if you don't know this already, it eats into the foam. So I want to give you an update on a little experiment that I did with that, and show you, well, give you an update on it. So let's take a look at these a little bit closer. So taking these in reverse order, I suppose, you may have noticed from the previous video that I did a little carving with their engraving tool on a piece of foam, and I did a variety of different types of engravings, some very shallow, some quite deep, just to kind of get a little feel for what it could do. I think the engraving tool is actually pretty nice and has a lot of potential applications, but then I said I was going to go back and paint this. Well, what I did is I coated it with 2 layers of the Bounce. Straight out of the bottle, gave it 2 layers, brushed it in, and I believe I showed you that before in terms of how it filled in the texture. I sprayed it with the texture spray paint. Now this is, well, keep it in focus there. This is Rust-Oleum's multicolored texture paint, which I like to use as it's a pretty fine grade of granularity, but it picks up a little dry brushing pretty nicely. But you can see that it caused some bubbling in a variety of areas. Let me bring that up nice and close. There we go. So you can see some of the bubbling that it did get underneath. So I don't know if maybe 3 coats are necessary. Maybe this product is a little bit more aggressive. I did put a very heavy coat on it. But just as a double check, I decided, in case it's maybe reacting actually with the Bounce product by itself, I just applied it to this half of the piece of card foam core that I had lying around, and then gave that a little check. And oh, wait a minute, let me turn off this overhead light. Let's see if that's a little bit better there. Fluorescent lights cause a up and down motion in the lighting. So I just applied that to this, and it didn't react with the Bounce at all. So it's definitely not a factor of the Bounce, but it's getting underneath the Bounce and is causing some deformation of the foam. So I'm not sure. Perhaps 3 coats might be better. I don't know. Something that I might experiment with a little bit more in the future. But for right now, I wouldn't recommend spraying paint over it directly until you've at least coated it with another layer of, say, latex paint, which seems to protect it quite well. Second thing I wanted to test was the drying time of the foam coat when you add paint to it. So what I did is I carefully mixed the same amount of the same amount of foam coat in a cup, you know, in the recommended proportion that they give, which is 3 parts of foam coat to 1 part, I'll get it right eventually, 3 parts of foam coat to a half part of Boost to a half part of water. So basically you mix up your boost in water, that's one part, and then you add 3 parts of foam coat to that. And that makes a slurry that then you can spread. Now when I applied this, I was able to get a pretty nice thin coat on this, and I'll give you a little profile shot there. So you can see that that's a pretty thin layer on there, maybe, I don't know, 32nd, 16th of an inch on it. Then I timed it, took about 28 minutes before it was dry to the touch, which is, I don't know, well, I'm not sure what to compare it to, but it did seem to, you know, dry at a reasonable rate. Then I mixed some paint into it. I made a second batch, same amount as the first batch, and then I added some black paint to it. Now, what I did though is I used paint for the first time as part of the water mixture. So basically it was sort of like a half part of boost, quarter part of black paint, quarter part of water. And what I found out is that when that mixed up, actually, it was so stiff and thick inside here that I didn't think I could even spread it. And I was a little curious, maybe I thought I had mismeasured it, maybe I didn't add enough of the liquids. So I went and I did another one, and I realized, no, it did the same thing. So you can't add paint to it and think the paint will replace the water. It doesn't have enough liquid in it. So you mix it as you normally would mix it, with the one part equaling half part boost, half part water, and then add about another quarter part of paint to that. When I did that, and I was able to spread it out, they also recommend that you tap it once you mix it. They send actually a nice little DVD that comes with it. DVD could have a little bit more information on some of the specs. I think I mentioned this before, but it does give you some nice tips. You tap it out, and that settles the paint, the boost on here and the foam coat, and then you get a nice, really, really nice smooth surface. Same thickness on it. And that took around 40 minutes or so. I actually lost a little track of the clock, but it did take quite a bit longer to set up. But the important thing that I wanted to kind of check out was how long does it stay viable in the cup? Once I mixed the base amount, it took about 2 hours before this really set up in the cup. So I was kind of surprised by that, because when I've been using it on my boards, I feel like I've got about 15 or 20 minutes before I start having problems. But I think that's due to it drying in the brush rather than drying in the cup per se. This was left undisturbed. Every 10 minutes or so I'd come over, stick it up, stir it up, and then I was like, nope, still liquid. In the cup, it took, oh God, I don't know, I want to say, well, it was well over 2 hours, and this was still liquid as well. So it doesn't seem to affect the cup's cure time as much as it affects the thin applications that you're putting down before those set up, which to me is synonymous with, you know, the amount that's in the brush and drying in the bristles. So I always have added paint to it, and I'm going to continue to do that because it does seem to add, you know, what is that, 28, 40, about 50% more dry time between the two. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was actually the most important experiment for me. Whether it warps the foam or not. Now, this is not entirely representative of the pieces I've been using, right? I'm usually coating boards that are 20 inches long by 10 inches wide on 1.5 inch thick foam. And what I've been finding is that it appears, and again, you know, so I hadn't done any experiments, that normally adhesives will pull on the surface and cause it to bend like this. And what I was finding was that the boards seem to be bowing like this, which is actually a lot more difficult for me to correct. When the boards bend like this, let's see here, I'll use this piece as an example. So when this warps like this, what I do is I turn it over and I heat the back up, and I push on the back like this, and I heat the back up, and then when it cools, it adds enough tension on the board to bring it back to straight, and I'm able to get them really, really flat that way. But when the board bends like this, and I want to heat the back, now I have to push on it and heat it, and it doesn't apply the same tension to it. So I've been having a little more difficulty ensuring my boards are straight. Now, a lot of times the foam comes to me already bent, and so that's easy to use that side, and perhaps the foam coat system is actually bringing it back to flat. But I end up with a few boards that seem to be bowed this way, despite me trying to check them all before I've been applying it. So in this case, I really wanted to see what would it do to a piece of flat foam core. This is maybe 6 inches long, maybe 2 inches wide, something like that. And if you look, This was perfectly flat when I applied it. There is a little tiny bow in the center, which would seem to imply that the surface coating is actually pushing outward, right? It's expanding and causing it to bow. It's slight on this piece, but when I'm trying to match up modular boards, it has been a little bit of a trick in order to get that to sit flat, particularly when you want to join in the middle, right? If the middle is bowed, then this piece is going to be short. In the paint one that I applied the paint to, it also shows some of that unusual warping, and it's not uniform all the way across. This end up a little bit high. This desktop here, this workbench is relatively flat. I'm not, there's no micrometer out here. I'm giving you my impressions, but it did cause it to warp a little bit. So what's the end verdict on that? It does seem to cause a little bit of warpage. How much? I don't know. Not much. Does it cause it to warp? Well, in any case, be aware. How about that? Be aware. I recommend doing a test piece, seeing what it does before you apply it to large areas. For a large single piece, especially with a lot of volume, like if you're applying this to rocks or mountains or a building or something substantial, that is not going to play a factor. But when you're applying it to thin sheets and you need them to join seamlessly at the edges, you may want to do a little testing of your own before you embark upon that, just to see how it's performing, and maybe you be able to better judge which sides of your flat sheet to apply it to, how to turn it over, get the best angle before you apply it so that you can utilize any warping to your advantage rather than your disadvantage. One last tip on it. I tried, when I first did my warp test, I did just put some foam coat right on a piece of foam core, and I just mixed it with water just to see what it would do. Well, what happened is when it dried, it just flaked right off the foam core. Actually, it didn't bind to it at all, and it binds on its own very well to foam. They say adding boost to the foam coat makes it stickier. In fact, it says right here on the label, whoop, super sticky, goes on thinner, non-toxic, good to know. And holy Christ, that really changed its bondability. That is really firmly on that foam core, and it's bonding the paper all on its own. So if you really want to apply this to any material other than foam, the boost is a must, and is going to really give you good performance, really good adhesion. That is, see, that's taking off the paper rather than lifting off the paper itself. So, thumbs up on the boost. It's a great product to add to your foam coat. Anyway, that's the foam coat review for this week. If you have any questions, you've seen something that you were like, ooh, did you try that? Let me know, and I'll put up a little list here of projects to do based on the comments that I get, and we'll be back with another review. And I still haven't checked out the grit products that are added to the foam coat to give it texture. That's going to be definitely in the next test that I do, and we'll see how that affects things like its warping, its durability, surface texture. I'll paint up one. We'll take a look at what kinds of texture that adds to it and how that relates to miniature wargaming terrain. So, hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you soon.